Hey, this is Brian Crecente. I am the president of Pad and Pixel, and I am joined today by Jasmin and Julian, who are co-founders of DigiTales Interactive. We're going to be talking about their approach to game design, adventure games specifically, but also their new game that's coming out. So I guess let me start by asking you both how you got into game development. I think you both come from English backgrounds or literature backgrounds. Is that right?
Yes.
Literature, yeah.
So
Comparative
how
literature.
did you make that jump into video games?
Maybe
Jasmine,
you
you wanna
want to
start?
start, Julian?
Okay, I can start. Well, I kind of did it on the side while I was studying. I got into game audio at first. I was a composer and sound designer for games while I was still working on my master's in literature. And I just wanted to do that because I really wanted to work in games, and that was the skill that I had at the time as somebody who's played the piano since, oh my God, 30 years ago now. And literature just became part of our game's identity insofar that they are very narrative heavy games. So it's not like a super big jump. We still use, I think, some of the things that we learned.
And
Yeah,
Jasmin?
I only started playing games pretty late in my early 20s. I think I was more into literature before that, but then I started discovering some indie games that had a pretty strong narrative and an interesting story. And I thought it was really interesting to explore the narrative possibilities of video games. And yeah, I think Julian and I were working together on creative projects for a long time. We also had a novel that we were working on, and we did some theater together. And then one day he pitched me his idea for our first video game, Lacuna, and I thought it was very interesting, which is why we started working on that.
So you all formed DigiTales Interactive in 2019. Your first game, Lacuna, came out in 2021. An adventure game. It's I believe 2D, not point and click. You actually use your WASD, use your keyboard, or I guess your controller to move your character around. Why did you decide to do a detective game?
We felt that detective games are a very natural fit to story-driven games because having to think about the story immerses you in a way that like just experiencing it more passively really doesn't. It would be story driven just because we are like literature people, so that was kind of a natural fit. But the detective aspect really came in because we realized that if you force people a little bit outside of their comfort zone, if they have to turn on their brains, they get engaged way more. They really care about the characters and the story that's going on because they have to learn their names and their motivations and their goals. So you, before you know it, like thinking about the case really invests you in the story and kind of vice versa.
Yeah, and in detective games, I think that story and gameplay are really intertwined. Like Julian said, you have to think about the story and the characters and the plot and everything to piece the cases together. So I think that was a really good fit. And our first game, Lacuna, was all about player agency. We really wanted players' decisions to matter. And you can also solve the cases wrong in Lacuna. And the story goes on nonetheless. So there was a great way to really have different endings and have also the player's detective performance matter.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I wanted to dig in a little bit into Lacuna because I think it shapes the game you did after that, and then of course From Ruins, which hasn't come out yet. But you had this really interesting story that you wrote, a blog post you wrote where you talked about your game design principles, and it's really fascinating the things you wanted to avoid and include. Before we get into that, though, I really need to ask you about your decision to use what's called closed text design. So for people not aware, that basically means you're given a statement or sentence and you have to fill in the blank. And in this case, you're doing this in a way that applies to being a detective. So that's how you're, I guess, allowing people to try to maybe not solve the entire case, but like solve sections of the case. What made you decide to sort of use that mechanic for this?
Well, it was already kind of proven by Return of the Obra Dinn, which is a brilliant detective game. So we basically got the idea, I think, from Obra Dinn originally. But the reason it works is because it leverages combinatorial explosion. Like if you give people, let's say, 3 or 4 possible solutions to a case, then there's a good chance that they can guess it, right? Especially in a game where you can just redo it. As Jasmin mentioned, in our games so far, you couldn't. You had to submit it one time, you had one chance, and the game would go on even if you got it wrong. So there was a risk in guessing it. But if you have like a sentence that's made up of multiple words, or you have multiple sentences, in each one you have to fill in a word, and you have multiple options for each word, then you multiply all these solutions with one another, these possible solutions, and it becomes impossible to guess. You have to have the right idea and think your way through to arrive at the answer. And this is what this closed text design kind of allows us to do.
Do you? There's obviously a lot of ways you could do this. When you settled on that approach, how did you decide how it was going to be implemented within the game?
I think we tried a couple of different things. At first, you solve cases by answering questions in dialogues, and then we had a friend playtest it, and he's a very experienced game designer, and he just said that it wasn't fun at all to solve the cases. And yeah, then we went back to the drawing board basically and tried to find a new solution. I think it was a lot of try and error and really a lot of testing, analyzing other detective games, trying to understand how they work, what is fun and what isn't, and then really asking people if they like it or not.
I want to add 2 things to that. First, this thing with the dialogues, I still think it was a good idea. It just didn't work because you basically had to start, like, if the game sort of reasons for you by having you construct it from start to finish and you only have like 2-3 dialogue choices, that doesn't work, right? So we said, okay, we start the player out in the like case submission dialogue. We start them out with the conclusion. They have to say the conclusion first and then reason like backwards, basically. This way people can't guess where the game will go, right? In the dialogue tree. They can't be like, yeah, this sounds reasonable. Oh, it would make sense if this happened next. But they were like, no, we start with the conclusion and then you have to go backwards to where it started. And you have to prove that you know it from the start. But it didn't work. And like the second thing I want to say, we just iterated over this like a million times throughout our following games too. We did it differently with all our games, including the next one.
Right. Well, I was going to say that sounds a little bit like Columbo. I don't know if you've ever seen Columbo, the TV show, but
I don't think so.
Very popular detective show from the 70s. But they start with, you know what's going to happen. You know the conclusion. And the whole story is figuring out how you catch the person, how you get the clues, and how you solve it. So Lacuna came out in 2021. Then 2024, you had Between Horizons, where you played around with Lacuna was 2D. Between Horizons, I think, was 2.5, basically. And you iterated a little bit on some of your ideas. And then that brings us to the game you're working on now, From Ruins, also a detective adventure game, back to 2D. I'm kind of zipping through here because I really want to talk about sort of the fundamentals of, I think, what you guys, what both of you talked about in terms of your game design principles, which I found fascinating. And so one of them was, and I think it has stayed true throughout all of your games, is no getting stuck,
Yeah.
which that sounds so simple until you apply it to a narratively driven game. So what does that mean? I'd love for you both to tell me what impact that had on the design and what does that mean to you?
Well, I think the original idea was that when you get stuck in a narrative game, it really takes you out of the story and it's very immersion breaking. Maybe you even have to Google the solution or something. So we wanted to find a way to implement our game design that doesn't make it possible to be stuck. But yeah, I think that's why we decided that you can solve cases wrong. Because you
Right.
can always submit the case, and even if you don't know what the correct solution is, you could just say, well, whatever, I just submit my solution and the story goes on nonetheless. So the flow of the story is never interrupted. And yeah, that was basically the idea.
And importantly, they don't tell you messed up, which
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
that's like a huge thing. Like, so you could think you're the smartest detective ever and then get to the end and realize you've gotten everything wrong, essentially.
Not until the very end. Usually you get the consequences a while later. So
Okay.
the story already branches and you get feedback on the cases like a few scenes later usually, and then something bad happens if you messed up.
But you can continue to mess up, I guess is what I mean. Like you can
Yeah, then you get a really bad ending.
you get a bad ending. Did you realize when you went into this, so the design principle being, we don't want to get people to get stuck or thrown out of the immersive elements of this game. Did you realize what a big knock-on effect that was going to have on the actual design and on what you'd have to do with the narrative?
I think we underestimated every design pillar that we had, including this one. Everything turned out to be a rabbit hole and a huge pain in the ass because we had, in Lacuna, for example, you just have to imagine I don't know how many cases there are, not that many, like 8 or 10 or something, but getting each one right or wrong is already a bunch of different combinations, right? Like just that, without even having all these story decisions that you can also make that also impact the ending. The same goes for Between Horizons. It's the same problem. In Between Horizons, we actually supercharged the problem with some other design decisions, but with Lacuna alone, technically you can have like 540 different endings, depending on which thread ended how. I mean, most of them are only very slightly different from one another, right? Where something in the last monologue is like a line is different. But this combinatorial explosion on that end kind of came to haunt us more than we anticipated. The one thing that we did that kind of worked out was we call it like cascading consequences, which was like we would work threads into, like instead of having the story branch the whole time and branch out forever, we would work out ways where consequences could like accumulate with one another, or we had a bunch of ways to mitigate that and still have it count and still have the game clearly remember it, reference it much later. But referencing it much later is kind of cheap. Like a character saying, hey, thanks for helping me out back in Act 1. You know, that's just one line that has to check one Boolean, but you still get the like experience of having some agency.
Right.
But for the most part, we like started aggregating things in numbers. Like you got this and that many cases wrong. But if you got this specific case wrong, this specific thing happened. But we don't have like a unique story for every combination that you could get wrong or right.
So you also, some of the other game elements, one of them was, and I think goes to why you decided to go with closed text, was this idea of many out and few in. So the idea is that, I know I'm telling you something you already know, but to explain to people watching, there are a lot of ways that you can get clues. There are a lot of things in the world that you can use to solve the puzzle. But once you are getting to that point, there's really only one way to solve the puzzle. Am I explaining that correctly?
Yeah, and also that you don't have to explain your train of thought. So you just submit the solution to the case, but you don't have to explain why you think that this is how it happened, which is also, I think, something that doesn't work well in some other detective games, because sometimes, like, how you got there as a player is very different from what the game intended for you. So I think it's smart to just like boil it down to one sentence that is the solution to the case, and you don't have to explain what your train of thought was. That was also part of it. And I think that also having different channels for getting clues, maybe dialogues, newspaper articles, but also stuff in the environment that makes the clues a lot more interesting and the exploration a lot more interesting. So it's not just looking at one type of clues all the time.
So with as I mentioned, with Between Horizons, you played around with the formula a little bit in terms of like some of the gameplay mechanics. How have things changed From Ruins? Let's talk about the detective work specifically. Have you experimented with, or are you tweaking the way the closed text works in this game?
Yeah,
And how
very
so?
much. So maybe we should talk a little bit about Between Horizons to explain why we did
Yes, please.
like how we ended up here. Because in Lacuna, when we had these case sheets, you would basically get a few options for each word to fill in that just came out of the ether. Like in Lacuna, you could say had blonde, brown, whatever hair, and you just got these words. They were just there. And in the case of like hair colors, that maybe makes sense. But when it comes to like I don't know, people's names or whatever. It's never explained in Lacuna how the protagonist sort of gets these ideas.
Right.
Why the person could be called Paul, but not some name that isn't one of the options, right?
Right.
And in Between Horizons, we were like, okay, you know what? The clues that you gather are the answers. And you have like types of clues. You have people, objects, and places. And depending on the case that you get, you can submit one of these. Each case in the game asks for a type, one of these three types of clue. And what we thought was cool, but ended up being actually kind of annoying, was that you keep all the clues throughout the entire game. Your handheld device fills up with clues,
Right.
and that also makes the game naturally harder because
Right.
over time you meet the entire crew of the entire ship, and you have like over 40 NPCs, and then the last case asks you who did the big crime at the beginning of the game, and you're like, oh wow, there's a lot of people now, right? And
Right.
it is really cool, but it also has some drawbacks. And with From Ruins, we landed on, you know what, we'll do the thing that the case of the Golden Idol did, where you collect the words like clues, but independently from that, we still have clues. So you still collect things in the environment, or rather photos of them, like objects that you find, or like a corpse or a crime scene or whatever, objects from there. But in the dialogues and in the descriptions of these clues and other contexts, you pick up words that could be relevant to your case, and you collect those, and then you can put them into the sentences. This is like the big evolution of how you get the material for the closed texts, and this felt the most natural, and it works really well in Golden Idol. So we're kind of happy with that one, really.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
one major change is that it's not possible to solve cases wrong in From Ruins. We decided against that because I really love logical deduction and challenging detective gameplay. And I feel like you can't really make the cases super challenging if you can solve them wrong, because people will get frustrated if they don't get anything right in the end. And yeah, that's something that I was really missing in our previous games. And now we decided that you just get feedback. If it's not correct, then you can try again. And now the cases are a lot more challenging. I feel like
Yeah.
some of the cases we already implemented into the game are really difficult. You can think about them for half an hour, maybe, I think. And I think that's really cool.
so that's
So we axed the no getting stuck thing, basically.
Yeah.
We were
right,
like,
and that's what I was about to ask. Like,
yeah.
so that's an interesting thing because obviously on the one hand, it's showing an evolution of gameplay between your three games, but also I'm assuming there's an evolution of your thinking about gameplay. Like what you thought early on with your first game was going to be something you really felt was important. It was one of your principles.
Yeah.
Is now you're not doing it anymore. So what made you change your mind over the course of those three games?
Seeing how much work it was to do it compared to how little payoff it had compared to other games that didn't do it and were better and more successful detective games. We were more honing in on the detective aspect with this game than the story aspect, although maybe it's actually the coolest story we've written so far, but it is more mechanics focused, and like Yasmin said, the puzzles are tougher and it feels more detective-y, I think, than our previous games. So we were like, okay, we're gonna really hone in on perfecting this aspect, and we're just gonna have to kill this other thing because it was just incredibly difficult. We have still branching content that's based on player decisions, but no longer based on player performance with the cases.
And I think it's also very rewarding if you keep trying to solve a case and then it says, no, it's wrong. I think at the beginning we thought, it doesn't feel good because it breaks the immersion. And I think for Lacuna that might be true because Lacuna is very focused on this idea of player agency. But I think if the game focuses more on the detective aspect, it can even feel good to have a wrong solution and thinking about it. And then at some point you're, oh, no, I get it. And then you have this eureka moment where you finally solve the case correctly.
And we've seen that with our testers. So it's not just a theory.
So we've been sort of talking about the mechanics and didn't talk about what it is. So obviously a detective game, but can you, both of you, give me your sort of elevator pitch for From Ruins? What is From Ruins?
Yasmin, you want to do that one?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, it's obviously a detective game, but it still has a strong focus on the story. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, and it deals with a lot of important topics, I think. Explores the question whether we want to have global network or not, and what the advantages and disadvantages of a global network are. And yeah, you play as a young woman named Cleo who is doing some investigation work in this post-apocalyptic world.
Okay. And it's interesting because this is your third detective game. They're all sci-fi in different ways. None of them are connected. Why is that? Why not have like the same detective coming back or have the same universe?
Well, for one, this is an IP thing because we work with another publisher on our previous games.
Okay.
But we also wouldn't want to. You spend years in a universe, you want to do something different. And we also kind of like stories that are just finished. And I'm not a big sequel guy. And I also think that sequels are often not very successful in the indie space. So we just want to do something fresh for ourselves and because we think it works better.
So this is coming out next year, is that correct?
Yeah, that's the plan right now. But we'll see.
We know what they all say about plans.
Exactly.
Anything else you want to say to people who might be interested, maybe never played one of your games?
Well, those who never played one of our games could check out Lacuna and Between Horizons while they wait for From Ruins. Those who have played our games, I will say From Ruins is more like Lacuna in some ways, not just the graphics, but also the fact that it's more linear. Between Horizons was like a semi-open world, and we also ditched that again. And yeah, follow us on our socials. We have a lot of announcements coming up. We're actually gonna announce a little side project sometime soon this fall. So we have a lot cooking right now.
And if you want to playtest From Ruins, you can also join our Discord server.
Right.
We always make public playtests there. Everyone can join.
Especially if you consider yourself part of the target audience. If you like detective games, that would be really valuable.
So I'm assuming a lot of this info will be on DigiTales Interactive's website and also probably Steam, or where can they find this information?
Yeah, digitales.games is our website. You'll find everything there. And From Ruins will be coming to Steam first, and then we'll see. More platforms TBD.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I can't wait for From Ruins. It sounds very interesting. I love the art style. I wish we had more time to talk about all the things that make these games amazing, but I think we're out of time now. But thank you very much.
Thank you.